I got to conference room B at 9:06. I remember the time because I glanced at the wall clock while pushing the door open, expecting the usual Monday budget sync. Except the room was empty. No analysts, no whiteboard clutter, no half-eaten bagels. Just Brad Halston sitting alone, leaning back like he owned the air. The first thing I noticed was the envelope, cream-colored, thick, placed dead center on the polished table like it had been waiting for me. Brad didn't stand up. He didn't say good morning. He just tapped the envelope with one lazy finger and said, "This isn't personal, Tom. We're just phasing out legacy positions." Quick note: before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. Legacy. That word hit me harder than I expected. Not because I didn't see this coming. I did. But hearing it out loud from him, of all people, that's what stuck. I'd been with Halvex for 27 years, long before it was even called Halvex. Back when we worked out of a converted auto garage in Aurora with space heaters that barely worked. I helped build the HX line from scratch, soldered the boards myself, coded the first firmware updates in between hospital visits when my youngest had asthma flares. And now, this kid, barely 6 months in, sitting there in a pressed shirt, probably still pinned at the shoulders, telling me I was obsolete. He pushed the envelope closer. "There's a severance package, 18 weeks. You'll keep healthcare through the end of the year." I didn't touch it, didn't say a word, just looked at him. Brad Halston, Vice President of Strategic Operations, whatever the hell that meant. The title didn't exist until he married into the boardroom. No engineering background, no field deployments, no classified access until 2 months ago. And yet, here he was, giving me my walking papers like he'd earned the right to sit across from me. I looked down at the envelope, then back at him. "Legacy," I said, smiling. Not a big smile, not angry. Just that quiet kind of smile you wear when someone's too dumb to realize what they've just touched. Like watching a toddler try to yank a fire alarm because it's red and shiny. Brad cleared his throat. "Look, I know this sucks, but this isn't me. This came from the top." "No," I said, standing. "This came from below." I took the envelope, not because I wanted it, just because I didn't want to leave it there like it belonged to him. Then I walked out without looking back. Not because I was above it, but because he wasn't worth the turn. I tossed the envelope in the passenger seat and didn't even open it. Just sat there in the parking lot for a minute, hand on the wheel, watching the rain hit the glass. And for whatever reason, I went back. Not to the layoffs or the meetings or Brad's stupid buzzwords. No, I went all the way back to Mercy General. 2006. Oncology wing. I can still smell the floor wax and those burnt coffee packets the nurses kept near the ice machine. I was sitting outside, room 218. Dad was in there, drifting in and out. The nurse said it'd be soon. I had my laptop open on a plastic chair, the kind that wobbles if you shift too hard, and my knee was bouncing like a jackhammer. That's when I finalized it. HX-1A, the prototype, the first working model that could handle dual-phase comms and survive a full EMP sweep. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, and it was mine. I remember sweating over the forms, double-checking every clause like it was a bomb manual. Patent applications aren't sexy. They're math and signatures and legalese stacked on top of each other. But this one mattered. I typed my name at the bottom, Thomas H. Larkin. Then I clicked Submit. That was the moment. The actual moment it all started, not at some company launch or lab presentation. Right there, in a damn hospital hallway with my back against a vending machine and my dad dying 20 feet away. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel excited. I felt tired. Then I saw him. Dad was standing in the doorway, one hand holding the IV pole, the other gripping the frame like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His skin was gray, eyes glassy, but he looked straight at me and nodded once. Then he said it, barely loud enough to catch. "Good. Do it in your name." Then he turned around and shuffled back into the room. That night, after he was gone, I didn't go home. I went to the Motel 6 across the street and pulled the laptop out again. Filed for the LLC, called it Larkin Systems. Didn't ask permission, didn't mention it to Halvex. Back then, we weren't even called Halvex yet, just Halberd Solutions, with 4 engineers crammed into a windowless lab over a dentist's office. Nobody had job titles, nobody had HR. We were all working off handshake contracts and mutual caffeine dependency. But I knew one thing. That prototype would be the foundation. Everything would grow from it. The modules, the firmware, the adaptive comms suite. All of it started with HX1A. So I filed it under my own name. Quiet, legal, clean. No one asked, not then, not later. When Halberd turned into Halvex and funding came in and everything got shiny, nobody pulled old patent records. Nobody cross-checked application dates. And I didn't offer because they never asked. Because part of them assumed they already owned it. And I let them assume, not out of malice, not out of greed, but because I knew what would happen someday. Someday someone like Brad would show up. Someone who didn't know the difference between a system you build and a system you buy. So I kept it quiet. And every new version that came after, HX2, HX3, the modular launch units, the vehicle integrations, every line of code came from that original backbone, mine. It started 6 months ago. They didn't introduce him like a new hire. They introduced him like a cousin coming home from college. Everyone, this is Brad Halston, the CEO said. He's family now. Literally. The guy had just married Julia Halverston, the founder's youngest daughter, the one who used to run marketing before vanishing to figure things out. She came back with a ring and a guy who called himself a strategic architect. Brad had no clearance, no background in code, defense systems, military ops, nothing. His resume was 2 pages of LinkedIn fluff, brand partnerships, innovation consulting, something about blockchain logistics. But 2 weeks in, he had a corner office, a personal assistant, and a new title that didn't exist until he showed up. Vice President of Strategic Operations. I remember his first meeting. 12 of us in conference room C going over the HX3 satellite tracking calibrations. This was serious stuff. Suborbital failovers, low bandwidth resilience. The kind of tech that could save lives if it worked, or wreck contracts if it didn't. Brad stood up, clapped his hands, and said, "Here's a thought. Could we make the satellites, I don't know, feel emotions?" Silence. Dead silence. I looked around, thinking maybe someone else would speak up. Maybe someone would laugh. But Brad wasn't joking. He had a straight face, arms crossed like he'd just cracked a code none of us had ever thought of. One of the junior devs coughed and said, "You mean like adaptive behavior modeling?" Brad lit up. "Yes, like emotional feedback loops. You know, human-centric disruption." I stared at him. This guy didn't understand systems. He didn't understand hardware, software, signal protocol. Hell, I'm not sure he even knew what Halvex made. He thought in buzzwords, talked about agile intuition and market-aware synergy, like we were making apps for college dorms instead of satellite-grade recon tech. He once suggested we rename the HX3 to something catchier, like Halo Mind. Said it sounded more consumer accessible. And the worst part, no one stopped him, because he was married in, because now he was family. That's what mattered, not history. Not contributions, not who put in 27 years holding the company together through budget cuts, audits, and prototype disasters. I was legacy. He was momentum. A month after that emotion comment, he pushed for a department realignment, said we had too many redundancies in the ops pipeline. That was the first time I saw the spreadsheet. My name wasn't redlined, but it was boxed, labeled pending in gray. That's when I knew. Brad didn't see me as experience. He saw me as overhead. And overhead is the first thing you cut when you're trying to impress a board. He started calling me sir in meetings. That fake respectful tone people use right before they tell you your office is getting repurposed. I watched him treat engineers like baristas, barking orders with that startup swagger like everything was 5 minutes from disruption if we just pushed harder. Brad never wrote a line of code, never sat through a 14-hour bug fix. Never stood in front of a government review panel with sweaty palms and a red laser dot circling his mistakes. But none of that mattered. He was in. And I was already being edged out. I kept thinking about that box name on Brad's spreadsheet. Gray text, pending, like I was a file to be archived. So I went home and opened an older file, not a spreadsheet, a contract. But let me back up a second. It was spring of 2010 when I had dinner with Dave Fenwick. Retired patent lawyer, former mentor. The kind of guy who could smell a bad clause in a contract before you even printed it. We met at a steakhouse outside Fort Worth, the kind with overpriced drinks and waiters who call you sir, like they mean it. I had just finished the second-gen architecture for HX and was weighing Halvex's full-time offer. I trusted Dave more than any HR rep, so I laid it all out for him. The stock options, the IP clause, the equity promises. He barely touched his ribeye. After I finished talking, he pointed at me with his fork and said, "You hand them this tech unprotected, they'll own your past, present, and future. You want to retire broke and forgotten?" I shook my head. "Then don't let them own you." That night, in my hotel room, I filed the paperwork. Larkin Systems, LLC. Registered in Delaware, clean and quiet. Then I logged into the USPTO site and transferred full ownership of the HX base architecture, all of it, into the LLC. Timestamp, 11:48 p.m., June 2nd, 2010. 3 months later, I signed on full-time with Halvex. They never asked about previous filings, and I didn't offer. HR assumed the IP came with me. After all, I was the guy, the architect, the one who'd been unofficially leading the build team for 4 years by then. I even changed my name in the system after I got remarried in 2013, dropped the old middle name, updated my address, tweaked a few payroll settings. Nobody ever cross-checked it with early patent applications. The paperwork just disappeared into the noise. For 15 years, they used it. The HX backbone, the adaptive modules, the encrypted call stacks. Every upgrade, every test run, every field deployment was built on that original core, and every single time they patched or updated the system, it pinged through a license key embedded in the base schema, one that traced back to Larkin Systems. Legally, quietly, untouched. No one ever found it because they were too busy looking ahead. Expansion, IPO talks, contracts with Lockburn, with state agencies, with federal defense. Everyone assumed someone else had done the due diligence. But I had. I made sure it was buried deep. Not hidden, not illegal. Just technical, dry, boring. Wrapped in enough legal gray to put a room full of execs to sleep. It wasn't a trap. It was a boundary, a fence. And now, watching Brad toss that envelope like he was doing me a favor, I knew the fence had done its job, because he had no idea what he'd just stepped on. I didn't sleep much the night after I pulled up the contract, just sat at the kitchen table, rereading Section 9C like it might disappear if I blinked too long. 3 days passed, no calls from Halvex, no check-ins, no exit interview, just dead air like I'd been deleted from the system the second I walked out with that envelope. Then the email came, subject line, inquiry regarding HX intellectual property. It was from someone at Lockburn Tech, Halvex's biggest rival in the defense sector. Not legal, not PR. Some mid-level strategy officer I'd never heard of. The message was short, 3 lines, total. We've reviewed the active patents connected to the HX architecture. Ownership appears to fall under Larkin Systems LLC. You should decide what happens to what you built. That was it. No threat, no posturing, just facts and one hell of a closing line. I stared at the screen like it might bite me. You should decide what happens to what you built. They knew. I pushed back from the table and started pacing. Back and forth across the kitchen, past the fridge, the coffee pot, the stack of unpaid bills shoved behind the knife block. I should have felt vindicated, but what I felt was pressure, the kind that sits between your ribs and makes breathing feel like work. I built Halvex. Not the name, not the board, but the core. I was there when the first prototype shorted out and almost torched the testing lab. I pulled 14-hour days during the cyber attack of 2014, sleeping in the server room between restores. I flew to D.C. to testify under oath when our procurement contracts got flagged during a congressional audit. Every time the company was on the ropes, I was the one holding the damn ropes. And now, here I was, pacing my kitchen in sweatpants, staring down an offer that could unravel everything. I didn't hate Lockburn, but I never trusted them either. They played dirty, cut corners, overpromised timelines, inflated specs. But Brad and the crew now running Halvex, they weren't any better. They hadn't earned what they were holding. They were coasting off systems they didn't understand, pulling levers on machinery they didn't build. And they'd made it clear I didn't belong there anymore. I sat back down, stared at the email. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. I just typed 6 words. If we talk, it's face to face. Then I hit send. No attachments, no signature, no posturing, just the terms. I didn't move after I hit send, just sat there, fingers still on the keys, waiting for, I don't know, lightning maybe. Nothing happened, so I opened another folder. Old contracts, originals. The kind you keep offline, backed up to a password-protected drive that's never touched Wi-Fi. The kind most people forget exist, until they don't. File name, Halberd.sa 2011 final.pdf. That was before the rebrand, before the shiny new logo and the clean corporate colors. Back when we were still trying to get Series A funding, still running cokes through ceiling tiles and fixing server errors with duct tape and caffeine. I'd drafted that contract myself. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew enough to get dangerous. And Dave had given it the once-over back then. He'd warned me, don't bury what matters on page 1. The smart stuff goes deep. Hide it in the weeds where only the desperate or paranoid will look. I scrolled to page 14. There it was. Section 9C, Proprietary Control and Restriction Clause. It read like a footnote, boring on purpose. But it was the fuse. Any commercial licensing, sublicensing, modification, sale, or derivative use of the HX platform or related architecture must be approved in writing by the original architect listed in Schedule B, verified by biometric signature. I clicked over to Schedule B. Name, Thomas H. Larkin, not Tom. Not the name on my badge or paycheck, the name I filed under, the name I built the LLC under, the name I used when I signed every rights doc connected to HX's early backbone. Nobody at Halvex caught it. They were too busy chasing the next investor, too eager to lock in funding. Nobody was reading Clause 9C when Clause 3A said, I'd work for cheap and turn prototypes fast. But this clause, this was the legal kill switch. Any expansion deal, any subcontractor use, any overseas licensing agreement, void, unless I approved it, unless I scanned in and gave consent as Thomas H. Larkin, which I never had. I leaned back in the chair, took a breath. Let the silence settle. This wasn't revenge, not even close. This was a failsafe for the system, for the tech, for everything I'd built. Because people like Brad don't just ruin companies. They ruin systems. They stamp slogans on hardware they don't understand, shove buzzwords into code that doesn't care, and then act surprised when it all breaks. I wasn't going to let HX become some watered-down Frankenstein project slapped onto a sales deck. I wasn't going to let it get sold in chunks to the highest bidder because someone in a suit decided legacy architecture was bad for the brand. I hit save on the dock, closed the folder, and for the first time in years, I felt it. Control, real control, not a title, not a department, but the power to say no and make it stick. I showed up on time. No lawyer, no assistant, no suit. Just khakis, a tucked-in shirt, and a folder under my arm with printouts no one had asked for. The office Lockburn picked was quiet. 3rd floor of a leased building outside Dallas. No signage, no receptionist, just a temporary badge that beat me into a conference room that smelled like new carpet and air sanitizer. There were 2 of them. One guy in a charcoal blazer, one woman in a navy skirt suit. They didn't stand, didn't smile too wide, just nodded and slid a folder across the table. Mr. Larkin, the woman said. We kept it simple. I opened the folder. 10-year exclusive rights to HX Core. Full technical and legal attribution to Larkin Systems LLC. Direct licensing under federal contract law. Total value, $860 million. Disbursement schedule, quarterly. Clause 14A, Halvex exclusion. Permanent, non-negotiable. I flipped through page by page. No fluff, no pitch deck, no presentation. Just ink and teeth. They knew what they were buying. No one mentioned the envelope. No one asked about Brad. This wasn't about revenge. This was business. And these people actually read the fine print. They brought me coffee. It was hot. Not the usual sludge from a communal pot. Actual brewed coffee, dark roast, still steaming. I signed the papers without a speech, no stories, no final words. Just 3 clean signatures, each one sliding across the page with a kind of finality that didn't need to be said out loud. The guy in the blazer collected the folder. You'll get onboarding documents from our systems team this week. But we won't rush you, the woman nodded once. We don't tell architects how to build. That stuck. I didn't say anything back. I stood, straightened my shirt, and walked out. No one clapped, no champagne, no dramatic send-off. Just the beep of the badge reader as I stepped out into a hallway that already felt cleaner than anything I'd walked through at Halvex in years. Outside, the sun hit my face like I hadn't felt it in weeks. I didn't look back, didn't have to, because I hadn't burned Halvex down. They lit the match the second they handed my system to a guy like Brad. All I did was let the fuse burn out. The first crack hit at 7:43 a.m., sharp. Halvex's homepage glitched. The HX 3.0 launch banner, the one they'd been teasing for 6 months, vanished mid-refresh. Just a blank white box and a little gray error-loading asset line where the future was supposed to be. I wasn't watching it live, but someone sent me the screenshot 15 minutes later. By 8:20, internal chatter leaked, not from dev, from legal. An audit request had been submitted from inside. Full product chain review, IP origin, compliance check. Someone finally opened a folder they were never supposed to touch. By 9:30, word hit Slack. Someone in investor relations got nervous, not panicked, just raising concerns. By noon, one of their biggest backers, a $70 million institutional fund from DC, pulled out. No call, no explanation, just a clean surgical withdrawal filed through their board contact. I watched it all roll in from my phone like weather radar, cold. I wasn't cheering, I wasn't angry, I was still. At 3:18, I got a text from Gavin Morales, one of the old engineers, used to sit across from me when we were debugging HX2's heat signature drift. Gavin, you really didn't tell them? I didn't answer, didn't need to. The question was the answer. By 5, 3 Halvex execs locked their LinkedIns. Their PR account posted some vague, unexpected transition language. No details. I didn't smile. I just made dinner. At 9:06 p.m., I got the email. Subject line, quick question, ownership confirmation. From a name I hadn't seen in 5 years. Halvex's former VP of Operations. Tom, just checking. Did we ever actually own the patent, or was that yours all along? I read it twice. Deleted it. Not out of spite. Just efficiency. He already knew. You don't email someone you fired if you're sure you had the paperwork. You only reach out when the ground under you shifts, and you realize you never knew where the cracks were. They never saw it coming, because they never bothered to ask the questions that mattered. Who built this? Who owns this? What happens if they walk? Halvex wasn't collapsing because I left. It was collapsing because they assumed I never would. It came through at 11:14 the next morning. No subject line, no intro, just a Dropbox link and one sentence. Figured you'd want to hear this. It was from Jordan Grant. Used to be my intern back in the HX2 days. Smart kid, quick learner, left for a fintech job right before things started getting stupid. I tapped the link. Audio file, 47 minutes long, labeled exec sync 081 final bash .mp3. I hit play. First thing I heard was Brad's voice. Panicked, breath tight, clipped, already mid-sentence. Wait, hold on. Whatever. He filed it under his old name? Silence. Then another voice. Lower, calm, older. The CEO. Thomas H. Larkin. That's what the documents say. Dated 2010. Filed through Delaware LLC. Fully traceable. Public record. Brad again. Louder this time. But we own HX. We always said we owned HX. The CEO didn't raise his voice. Turns out we said it louder than we read it. Another voice jumped in. Legal maybe, nervous, fumbling. If the IP was secured before his employment began, and wasn't disclosed due to lack of contractual trigger, then, technically, Brad cut him off. Who the hell missed this? Silence. Long. The kind that isn't just quiet. It's sinking. Someone cleared their throat, far from the mic. Papers shuffled. Nobody answered the question. I paused the file, sat with it for a second, then played it again. All of it. Every word. Every breath. Every panicked scramble from a man who thought his title came with bulletproof ownership. I didn't smile, didn't laugh. I just listened. Because that sound, that slow unraveling of people who'd never respected the architecture, the code, the contracts. It was honest. They didn't read the fine print because they didn't think they had to. Brad thought leadership was entitlement, but systems don't care who marries who. They run how they're built. I closed the file, turned off my phone, left it face down on the table, not out of drama, just done. 6 months later, I walked onto the stage at the National Infrastructure Security Summit. No lanyard, no Halvex badge, no corporate handler trailing behind me. Just me, a mic, and a placard at the podium that read, Thomas H. Larkin, creator of HX Core. The room was full, more suits than engineers, but I saw the ones who mattered. Front row had a few I recognized. Some I'd mentored. Some I'd fought with in meetings for years. A couple still had dirt under their nails. Good. I didn't talk about Halvex. Not once. I talked about code integrity, about how a rushed patch becomes a vulnerability, how shortcuts now become failures later. I talked about systems that outlast people, if they're respected. And most of all, I talked about architects, not figureheads, not influencers. Real architects, the ones who build the backbone, who don't get their names on glossy posters, but who make sure the system doesn't fall apart under pressure. I kept it short. No slides, just words. When it was done, they clapped. Not loud, not long, just enough. The kind of applause that means they were listening. I stepped down and headed toward the side exit, ready to dodge the networking noise, when a young guy, maybe early 20s, buzz cut, laptop under one arm, stepped in front of me. "Nobody ever said your name," he said. "I mean, they always said HX was a team thing, built by committee, but now I know." He looked straight at me. "You were the system." I didn't correct him, didn't explain how many other hands touched that code, didn't deflect, didn't downplay it. I just nodded. Because that placard up there, it didn't come from branding or politics or marriage. It came from the work, and now my name was finally where it belonged, not on a badge, but on the blueprint, on the contract, on the future.